Thank you for joining me in this video. This is titled The Sound of Silence, Understanding Your Tinnitus. And a little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Erin Walborn-Sterantino. I am a doctor of audiology here at Audiologic Solutions. I've been working with tinnitus patients for the past 30 years, and I'm currently a board member and secretary of the American Tinnitus Association. On the side, I teach mindfulness-based stress reduction, and I have training in mind-body medicine and in polyvagal theory. So this presentation, the disclaimer is that these are my views, and this is not meant to be a substitute for individualized medical advice or a treatment plan for you. This is intended for general knowledge, and when you come to our practice, you will receive a full individualized tinnitus treatment plan, and your hearing and your tinnitus will be evaluated. So for the purposes of this presentation, this is for general educational purposes. So what is tinnitus? Well, tinnitus is the perception of a sound when there's no external sound present. It's not a disease in itself. It's a symptom of something else. And it can take on many sounds. I often hear patients tell me that it sounds like a hissing, a ringing, a buzzing, but it often can take more than one sound at a time, or it may change or fluctuate. So we do know that the pitch of the tinnitus, what it sounds like, and the loudness of it can absolutely change, and for no apparent reason. And this does not mean that your tinnitus is getting worse or that you have a disease. There are two main kinds of tinnitus. We have subjective tinnitus, which is where the sound that's being heard by the person is not experiencing it from an outside sound source. And objective tinnitus is a rarer form, and this is where the tinnitus sound itself is caused from a physical sound source within the body. And an example of objective tinnitus is having pulsatile tinnitus in sync with your heartbeat. And perhaps that is where you have a narrowed blood vessel and you're hearing a turbulent blood flow. And your physician would be able to hear that as well through a stethoscope. But most people living with tinnitus experience subjective tinnitus, and even though there is no external sound source, that sound can be perceived as very real to the person who's experiencing it. And so then we look at duration of tinnitus. There is brief or transient, and this is where you might hear a little bit of that ringing or buzzing just for a few seconds, and then it goes away on its own. This is very normal, so if you have that, don't worry about that. Acute tinnitus is when you have tinnitus that started less than 6 months ago, typically goes away on its own, and it may be following maybe a head injury or exposure to noise. And then there is chronic tinnitus, and that is tinnitus that's lasting 6 or more months. And so some of the statistics that we have is that 1 in 10 individuals, that's over 27 million people in the United States, experience tinnitus. 90% of people with chronic tinnitus have hearing loss. 50% of people who experience it never talk with a healthcare provider. And 1 in 5 people with tinnitus describe it as being bothersome or significantly affecting their daily life. So we need to look at what causes tinnitus. Now, we know that there is no one single identifiable cause, that it's often associated with something else. And as we talked about before, tinnitus by itself is not a disease, it's a symptom of something. So, common associations with tinnitus are hearing loss, noise exposure, medications, other health conditions affecting the ear, maybe like Meniere's or an acoustic neuroma, head injury, jaw disorders, even head and neck tension and cervical spine issues, blood vessel and cardiovascular conditions, and stress is often associated with bothersome tinnitus. So we're going to look at what is the current research on tinnitus production. And these are the proposed mechanisms. Now, we are going to take each one of these individually, and they are each supported by animal and human research, but we know that tinnitus is very complex, and there's not one mechanism that explains all cases. So these mechanisms are not mutually exclusive, and they may occur together, and it's an active area of research. So the proposed mechanisms are altered or reduced input from the ear, increased central gain, increased spontaneous neural activity, and reduced disinhibition. Now, in order to talk about those, I want to walk you through the auditory pathway first, because any changes in function at different points along this pathway or altered auditory input can contribute to tinnitus, and which is what we're going to talk about in a little bit. But let's look at how the entire auditory system works. Well, we have this pinna, this appendage on the side of our head, right? And it's shaped on the side of our head this way for a reason. It collects sounds and it converts them. It actually collects and amplifies sounds as it comes down through your ear canal and it hits your eardrum. And then your middle ear, the eardrum vibrates and it makes these bones wiggle or move. And that's converting sound energy into mechanical energy. And then that pushes fluid into this inner ear and that stimulates these little sensory hair cells. Now, these sensory hair cells are lined up along this entire cochlea like a piano keyboard. So all of our high pitches are at one end and all of our low pitches are at another. And wherever these hair cells are stimulated, this converts this mechanical energy into electrical signals that travel up to the brain via the auditory nerve. And as it comes from the auditory nerve, it passes through several processing centers to the midbrain before it reaches the auditory cortex on each side and other brain networks involved in hearing. And this is where the auditory signal is decoded, it's processed, and this is where we perceive sound. So let's look now at the theories of tinnitus production. The first one is if we have hearing loss. And hearing loss, sensory neural hearing loss, means we have a damage to these sensory cilia or hair cells, okay? And whenever you have some damage to the hair cells, they're not providing the same auditory input for that frequency range that they would be if they were healthy. And so this loss of stimulation into the cochlea for those frequencies can alter the auditory input, and this can trigger adaptive changes throughout the whole entire auditory system. So what's happening is if sound is coming in and it's not being stimulated in that frequency region, your brain perceives it more as silent there, which is what you're perceiving as hearing loss. And the causes of hair cell damage are noise exposure, aging, genetic differences, certain medications, toxins that can harm the ear, viral or bacterial infections, head injury, or reduced blood flow to the inner ear. So this leads us to the second theory of how tinnitus develops, and this is called increased central gain. So when the brain senses that there's this reduced auditory input, it actually tries to help us out, and it increases the sensitivity of our auditory system. And this can amplify internally generated neural activity. So to repeat that, when the brain receives reduced or altered information from the ear, it might try to compensate by becoming more sensitive to sound. And this is called central gain theory. So here now we have a little bit of hearing loss. And now our brain senses that we have this loss of input. And so it tries to turn everything up internally. And that leads us to the third theory of tinnitus production. We know that every living mammal has spontaneous neural activity, and that changes in the auditory system can cause some of the brain cells to become more active than normal, firing even when no external sound is present. So when we have reduced auditory input and we have central gain, which is turning up our internal sensitivity to the noise inside of us, and we know we have increased spontaneous neural activity, and now we may be able to notice more of it in a more repeatable pattern. So we're more aware of our own internal body sounds at this point. Which leads us to current theory number 4 and the last one, which is called reduced disinhibition. So our auditory system relies on inhibitory neurotransmitters, such as GABA, to help us filter out the low-level spontaneous neural activity that we are hearing in our brainstem. And when we have exposure to noise exposure and chemicals or toxins, this braking system, where it's when it's working efficiently, The GABA, it breaks our system, so we don't hear the underlying auditory neural activity. It's kept below our conscious level of processing. Well, when we have this reduced disinhibition, it means that the brakes aren't really fully working. And so some of this internal spontaneous activity is not being filtered out as effectively as it used to be. And so now we have even more reason to possibly and potentially hear it. Okay? So to sum those up again, knowing that not all of them may be occurring for different people's tinnitus production, but these are the current theories that may occur together or may occur somewhat exclusively. There's still a lot of research being done on this, but we have possibly some hair cell loss, which reduces the input to our auditory system. Our brain compensates by trying to turn up the volume, called central gain. Our auditory system and our processing centers have reduced a braking system. So within the brainstem itself, we have reduced disinhibition, which means that the GABA neurotransmitters aren't able to effectively filter out that low-level background noise anymore. And we know when we've increased the gain that we've had amplified spontaneous neural activity. And all of this can result in the fact that one might hear something like tinnitus. Now, why we have this is not why we're bothered by it, okay? This is just the production of it. Tinnitus by itself is a neutral signal. So, key takeaways from this section. Tinnitus is thought to reflect changes in the neural activity within the auditory system. And tinnitus is associated with hearing loss, noise exposure, and other health conditions. Researchers have proposed several biological mechanisms that we just talked about that may contribute to tinnitus. We know they're not mutually exclusive and they may occur together, and that the brain networks involved also are attention, emotion, memory, and perception. So those are the key takeaways as to what is tinnitus and why do we have it. And when you have your audiologic eval, your tinnitus evaluation, we will be going over your test results in great detail to help you understand what is the main reasons potentially why you might have your tinnitus. And again, why you have it is not necessarily why you're bothered by it. So we'll address that in another video. I hope this is helpful for you, and we will update these videos as more science and evidence-based research comes out with potentially different other mechanisms that may contribute. Thank you, and I hope to see you again soon.